those of you who've just joined online or even this afternoon in person, this is the United Nations Jamaica Partnership Forum 2022. We've been having rich dialogue, discussions, networking, building bridges, and making friends, I hope, during the long wait for lunch. And I won't stay in between the next session because we're very excited for it. You may join our conversations online using the handle and hashtag UN Jamaica. This afternoon session will feature two key panel discussions, and we'll also have a number of special keynote presentations for you as well. The first focused on financing climate resilience and the blue economy, and the second panel focused on innovative financing to promote circular and creative economies. Are you ready? To introduce our next and our keynote speaker is someone who knows him even more than I do, knows him very well. Please welcome Dr. Gary Conneal.
Thank you so much. What a morning, really. What an exciting way to start our day and to begin these discussions. It is really a pleasure to introduce the next speaker. Dr. Eugenius Jean Leon is the 6th president of the Caribbean Development Bank, and he began his career in the throes of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I can tell you his vision has already been felt throughout the region. I first had the pleasure to hear him speak in Costa Rica. And after the presentation, I said, I definitely first, and I'm going to admit this very humbly, I was surprised to hear this from someone who had spent years in the IMF. So shame on me, huh? But his vision, his understanding of our circumstances, the level of ambition, and helping us think through how we could develop new instruments to understand challenges to development was just inspiring. So that same evening, we had dinner together at a Japanese restaurant, I hope you'll remember, and I was hooked. And since then, he shared with me his presentations, his writing. He's really inspired a lot of my thinking around what we can do in development. So it really is an extreme pleasure to introduce a colleague and a friend with over 30 years of experience in academia and economic development that has served the Global South, and even right here in Jamaica, by the way, where he served as the IMF Senior Resident Representative in Jamaica. So first, welcome back. We're happy to have you, and you have the floor. Welcome.
Thanks much, Gary. At least I recognize some faces that tell me I am not exactly in foreign territory. First, let me acknowledge not just those of you who are here in the room, but equally those who are joining us online. And to state that really it is good to be back in Jamaica, a country I had the privilege of residing in for almost 4, what I like to think of as enjoyable and fulfilling years. It is significant that although I moved away over 10 years ago, when I come back to Jamaica, I land here, my friends say, welcome home. So if you hear me say us, we, our, a lot today, it is because I am speaking to friends and colleagues whom I worked with and continue to work with now for, I want to say, a better Jamaica. It is therefore an honor and a privilege to deliver this address at this partnership forum to mark the 60th anniversary of Jamaica's independence. So let's begin with a little bit of, let's say, reminiscing. At the stroke of midnight on August 5th, some 60 years ago, the Union Jack was ceremoniously lowered, and Jamaica's national flag, the black, green, and gold, was raised, signaling the first declaration of independence in the English-speaking Caribbean. And that started a process that was to unfold across the entire region. According to the Handbook of Jamaica, 1962 edition, at that time, there were 1,622,800 persons living in Jamaica. The economic growth was 3.6% per annum. life expectancy was 64 years, and infant mortality rate was 48.1 per 1,000. I say that to give you the context of where we started, because I want to fast forward this to today, and to start by saying a lot has transpired since then. So considering Jamaica's economic performance as our first point of departure, the average rate of real GDP growth has been much lower than I think we all desired. Indeed, after growing at an average rate of 3.1% during the decade of the 80s, the average real growth fell to 0.4% during the period 1990 to 2020. This partially reflects the impact of a number of shocks, including natural hazard events, the Great Recession, and the COVID-19 pandemic. However, this performance also reflects the decline in traditional exports, such as alumina, bananas, and sugar, the latter two being impacted by the phase out of European trade preferences. At the same time, these traditional exports were not replaced, helping to stymie growth between 1990 and now. The lack of growth in the export sector is symptomatic of a more fundamental issue, which is declining competitiveness and lack of adequate innovation, which prevented the emergence of a dynamic export sector producing more complex goods and services to underpin sustained and inclusive growth. So in recognition of this, in 2013, the government of Jamaica embarked on a systematic effort to improve competitiveness, focusing on institutional and infrastructural upgrades that would lower costs, facilitate investment, and create a healthy ecosystem for internationally competitive and dynamic businesses. Efforts were made to improve logistics infrastructure in a manner that would create stronger linkages between agriculture and manufacturing and tourism. Emphasis was placed on facilitating trade by targeting the institutional and regulatory framework that ultimately helps to determine the dynamism and cost of the business sector. These institutional upgrades included efforts to reduce the time taken to transit items through the port, facilitate the use of movable assets as collateral, allow the ability of labor to negotiate contracts in a flexible manner, and reduce the time taken to register a business. These actions have tilted the export trajectory upward again. Indeed, export growth has averaged 4% in real terms since 2014, but needs to grow much, much faster if this sector is to create a platform for sustained headline growth. Hence, there is much more ground to be covered if the government of Jamaica is to facilitate the expansion and diversity of exports with higher value added that would underpin the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals and the broader aspirations of the people of Jamaica. At the same time, the United Nations Human Development Index shows Jamaica has progressed from 0.659 in 1990 to 0.709 in 2021, an average annual HDI growth of 0.24. And if you know how the HDI index moves, it really is very glacial. And so that has to be a very strong performance for Jamaica. This means, therefore, that in the last 30 years, Jamaica has been among the high-ranked nations with achievements in the three basic dimensions of long and healthy life, access to education, and a decent standard of living, which are the three components that make up the Human Development Index. Similar commendable strides were recorded in social development, with poverty, which was 24.6% of the population in 2013, having declined to an all-time low of 11% in 2019 at the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. This decline coincided with improvements in the macroeconomic conditions, particularly the reining in of inflation and notable reductions in unemployment. In the intervening years, Jamaica also embarked on a social safety net reform program and legislative action to further strengthen the social protection system, which sought to break the vicious cycle of intergenerational poverty through human capital development. The Caribbean Development Bank has been, I dare say, a loyal partner in the efforts to create a dynamic and innovative economy in the past, and will continue to be a partner with the government and people of Jamaica in this regard. In 2014, the bank provided a policy-based loan that supported the government's efforts at achieving fiscal consolidation, competitiveness, growth, and social cohesion. Recognizing the importance of resource mobilization and implementation, CDB also provided grant funding for technical assistance in these areas in 2018. CDB also provided the funding that facilitated the development of Vision 2030, a comprehensive development plan that was based on wide consultation. The problem, though, is in spite of the contrast that I have just painted, where we started in 1962 and where we were around 2020, we cannot not feel we can do better. We cannot not feel that we can do better. Why do I say that? Justifiably, the expectations of citizens of the new nation were great at the Declaration of Independence. These expectations have preoccupied the agenda of successive post-independence governments. And however the approaches may have differed, I think we can all agree that the ideologies have always been driven by a desire to chart the best path for Jamaicans and to afford each man, woman, boy, and child the opportunity to achieve their full potential and have sustainable livelihoods. This remains the key preoccupation of all of us, not just for Jamaica, but for the entire region. Not just for yesterday, but for tomorrow. And not just for today's youth, and I see quite a few of them around, but for the next generations of our Caribbean's youth. So as we close the curtain on the last 60 years, I think history, once written, will conclude that Jamaica has made notable strides. However, one of my personal guiding principles is to approach every issue from the premise that, as I said, we can do better. Therefore, as the aspirations of 1962 remain relevant today, and the social and economic challenges of nation building have intensified, we ask a couple of questions. Do we have the tools and capacity to forge the promised land envisioned at the raising of the flag? As the winds of change bear down on us, do we have the discipline and fortitude to make the quantum leap that is necessary for the next 60 years to be exponentially better than the first? So what was the mission of independence that I am about to challenge you to want to do exponentially better than at that time? I call to mind the admonition of the Right Excellent Norman Manley, national hero of Jamaica, who said that while his generation were able to achieve political independence, the mission of the next generation is to achieve economic independence. Allow me, therefore, to share a small secret with you. That next generation is us. Next generation is us. And while some help may come from external sources, and I think you'll recognize that phrase, none but ourselves can chart our course for financial freedom. The 60-year milestone provides an ideal opportunity to recommit ourselves to this goal and redouble our efforts to achieve it. However, one thing is sure, we will not meet the needs of today or tomorrow using the approaches of yesterday. The development context of 2022 bears no resemblance to that of 1962. For one thing, we are battling the existential impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, an event that I often compare to as a perfect storm because it simultaneously extinguished demand and eradicated supply. The impact on the CDB's inherently vulnerable borrowing member countries has been unprecedented, with real economic activity declining by 7.6% in 2020. The effect on service-oriented economies was particularly devastating, with declines as high as 18.8%. Commodity-based economies did not fare much better either, registering contractions of as much as 13.5%. Behind these numbers, though, and these are headline numbers that we all hear all the time, behind these numbers were lives severely disrupted by reduced remittance flows, loss of income or income reduction, socioeconomic obstacles to the delivery of education, and uneven access to health services. And those we never hear about. We only hear the headline growth numbers. Then, just when we began to speak of recovery, right on the heels of the pandemic came the Russia-Ukraine conflict, which, even as we speak, is impacting commodity and financial markets, increasing inflation, disrupting supply chains, and heightening food insecurity. If we can learn anything from recent events, it is that we cannot prevent the shocks. However, we can withstand the impacts if we prepare ourselves by building resilient economies, institutions, and societies. That level of resilience to which I refer, which is the expanding of the resilience ecosystem, will require considerable investment and financing. To give you an idea of the quantum of finance required, the United Nations Global Compact Action Platform on Financial Innovation for the Sustainable Development Goals estimates that US $3 to $5 trillion in investment is required annually for developing countries as a whole to meet the SDG targets. Here in the Caribbean, more than 100 billion is needed to build resilience, implement transformation, and achieve sustainable development in this region. Between 2023 and 2030, the deadline established by the UN for achieving the SDGs, the region will require at least 40 billion for sustainable energy, 22 billion, all of that is US dollars, for water and sanitation, another 11.5 billion for transportation, 13 billion for agriculture and food security, and at least another 12 billion for digital transformation. So while there is commitment to national and regional development targets, our governments are constrained by high debt levels and limited fiscal space. And so where does that leave us? I think we need to start by acknowledging these governments cannot do it on their own, or even in collaboration with the development of financing institutions like the CDB. My friends, this level of financing will only be harnessed through partnerships. And this presents ideal opportunities for business and industry. It is therefore critical for us to reimagine the role of private enterprise in the delivery of sustainable development outcomes. And so that's what I want to speak a little more about this afternoon, the role of the private sector and the issue of finance. So first, my friends from the private sector, and I have quite a few of them in Jamaica, might be thinking, why should we get involved? Development is not my business. So I'm calling on those very friends to re-engineer your mindsets about who is responsible for what. The basis of my appeal is simple. Sustainable development is too important for it to be the exclusive purview of our governments. In fact, the President and Chief Executive Officer of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, Peter Bakker, has said that his aim is to position the SDGs at the heart of every business strategy. He argues that business has a critical role to play as a source of investments and as a driver of technological development and innovation, not to mention as an engine for economic growth and employment. Referencing climate change, a focal point of the SDGs and a major global concern, Bakker asserts that business is the best implementation partner for governments around the world as they strive to hit the climate targets. The World Business Council for Sustainable Development spearheaded the Low Carbon Technology Partnerships Initiative to bring together businesses and other partners from across the globe to accelerate the development and deployment of low carbon technologies. That wasn't about charity. It was about big business, as at inception, the initiative had the potential to deliver as much as 65% of the necessary emissions reductions, generate between 5 and 10 trillion US dollars in investment, and create 25 to 45 million jobs globally each year. In this Bakker illustration, the private sector was called on to partner by supporting conservation, pursue nature-based solutions, and prioritizing sustainability in operations and decision-making. Broadening this to include other development challenges beyond climate implies that the notion of sustainable business must become mainstream. Financiers must unlock the capital that will drive sustainable development solutions, and governments and businesses must work together to achieve goals that address development challenges. This makes private enterprise an indispensable factor in the sustainable development equation. The message, therefore, is clear. Development has to be a shared responsibility, one where individual shareholder egos are subordinated through the notion that development of the whole will always imply development for all. Closer to home, most firms have some form of corporate social responsibility as their activities. Corporate Jamaica, as far as I recall, believes in giving back, but now it must evolve from not just giving back as charity, but moving from charity to investment. The question now is how, and when do we embrace the public value proposition of better targeting of expenditure as investment in development? Indeed, we should argue that profitability and development are not incompatible. Furthermore, we could state that private enterprise should apply the ingenuity, innovation, entrepreneurial drive, and goal-oriented approach employed in commercial pursuits to national and regional development. So we need, therefore, to reimagine public-private partnerships. Conventional thinking sees the private sector as an adjunct to the social and economic development process but with the liberty to opt in or out. But I'm of the view that private sector must have a causal role in development, charting initiatives from inception to implementation, not entering as residual financiers. So why is this important today? Because we need a new type of partnership, a partnership for development between the private and public sectors. The partnership must operate throughout the life cycle, from origination through design to execution to monitoring, evaluation, and adaptation of activities, together with the associated policies and financing that can then overcome the challenges that we face. Consequently, the public-private partnership, or PPP as we know it, will remain constrained in raising its effectiveness. It has reached its upper bound. That was a mechanism for yesterday. We need solutions for tomorrow. So let me invite you to reimagine PPP. What prevents us from reframing PPPs as partnerships for profits and prosperity? When you drill down on the areas of focus and anticipated impacts of sustainable development agenda, they speak to the very heart of business objectives. Programs that enhance education and improve skills development will create a knowledge-oriented workforce with the extensive skill base necessary for industries of the future. That, my friends, is sustainability. When we talk about economic transformation, our goal is to facilitate the growth of business and industry, to provide employment and other income-earning opportunities, to increase disposable income and improve standards of living, which will ultimately result in a sustainable consumer base. That, my friends, is essential for business. When we target health, energy security, water security, and food and nutrition security, it is to improve living conditions and enhance the well-being of our populations, allowing the people of Jamaica and the Caribbean to realize their full potential, which will therefore lead to stable and resilient economies and societies. That will attract investment and foster business growth. Therefore, we are left with no other conclusion than sustainable economies are therefore the sine qua non of sustainable businesses. So it cannot be businesses for development. Development is the basis of sustainable businesses. I put it to you that these are not outcomes that the private sector should leave to chance. Rather, private enterprise must become an active partner in directing and determining implementation of the agenda that will bring about these desired results. Friends, the best way to predict the future is to create it. So where does that leave us? It says at the same time, before we can speak about opportunities for enterprise and investment, we must recognize the need for access to sources of financing. CDB has proposed to establish a multi-sourced, multi-instrument financing ecosystem with a suite of instruments to address various needs, ranging from emergency financing to longer-term fiscal goals. This adroit framework must, of course, be underpinned by appropriate governance and regulatory systems. The instruments would have to include almost everything we know exists now. Bonds designed to propel sustainability and initiatives in the green, blue, and orange economies, and the cultural and creative industries. Private equity to drive new enterprises. contingent debt instruments to manage uncertainty, derivative-based instruments to manage risks, and concessional funding to lower the cost of funds. The instruments must be designed, however, to allow use with a purpose and have terms that can be customized to distinguish. I like to think of it as three buckets: financing for rescue, financing for recovery, and financing for repositioning. There are three different aspects of our trajectory, and it cannot be the same finance for all. And when I say the same finance, I'm not talking money, it's the terms. The terms of financing for rescue cannot be the same as the terms of financing for recovery, cannot be the same as terms as financing for repositioning. And so we have to have that nimbleness, that flexibility in terms of how we can create the appropriate terms for the appropriate bucket of the use of financing that we need. As I have repeatedly stated, the level of support needed will not come from traditional sources. So this presents, again, opportunities for innovative instruments, creative partnerships, and novel approaches to marshalling resources for development. So imagine if we could harness the capacity of the pension funds that exist, pool monetary resources across the region, or have the ability to attract institutional investors. What prevents us from devising business and investment initiatives that can propel sustainable development and bring a return on investment that is sufficient to secure funding from global donor organizations and private financiers? What about reimagining the desired reductions in premium, the cost of funds, as the price of implementing activities that build resilience and therefore enhance sustainability? Can we maturate the concept of return on investment and move this from return on investment to return on sustainable development or sustainable investment? We can ask, and it's a question I hear all the time, there's too much risk, not enough return to attract the private sector. Where is our sense of responsibility? And so we can ask the question, is it better to have high nominal returns for a short period of time than to have lower nominal returns over a sustained period of time? Then we start talking sustainability. And should the concept of return not include externalities from achieving sustainability in development? I propose to you that our only limitations lie in a failure to recognize and utilize our limitless creativity and ingenuity. My friends, I hope my words will spark a sense of urgency. Time is against us, and we cannot foresee or predict the next big upheaval. However, we can prepare for it by building resilient businesses, institutions, social systems, and economies. This will only be achieved through, at least in my mind, collaborative endeavors where governments, development finance institutions, and the private sector can engage as development partners, not as residuals, not as one higher, one lower, development partners. To facilitate this, there must be a process triangle. That's my phrase for it. Encompassing viable projects plus adequate and affordable finance and an effective implementation apparatus that is characterized by strong governance and appropriate regulatory frameworks. This combination, the investment activities, the finance, and the implementation, apparatus. This combination will engender the confidence that is critical for a development partnership. CDB stands ready to lead or facilitate this collaboration. So as the next 60 years beckon, I will close with the words of one of Jamaica's most beloved sons, and I'm sure you know the Honorable Robert Nesta Marley. So my brethren and my sistren, which way will we choose? We better hurry because we've got no time to lose. Thank you.